Good evening to each and every one of you, and thank you so much for tuning in to Tuesday TuneUps. I hope and pray that you've had a wonderful Tuesday. If not, I pray that things get better for you during the remainder of the week. Go ahead on, like, love, and share this on your page. Let somebody know that we're in Tuesday TuneUps tonight, and to all of those who are visiting, wherever you are visiting from, we are grateful to have you tonight in our Bible study. Hopefully by now you've gathered your study materials, meaning your Bible, your study guide, or whatever you may need to follow along on tonight, and turn with us to Job 29. Job chapter 29. We're in the 29th chapter of Job. Let's go to God in prayer while you're doing that. God, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your grace, your mercy, your love, and your kindness. I thank you for giving us this opportunity to come and study your word. I pray your blessings upon our time together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Job 29. Let me do a quick recap on where we've been thus far. Chapters 27 through 31 will constitute or make up Job's closing monologue. And in those verses, you'll discover that neither Job nor his friends have accomplished what they've set out to do. Job's friends have not proved their case, and Job hasn't solved his problem either. Yet, when you continue to read these chapters, you'll discover that there is something going on. It appears that Job is somewhat on the right road, and he's strengthening his faith, and all of these things are taking place. But there are also some difficult pieces here. There are some difficult pieces here because we are not sure if these are Job's words in some cases or someone else's. We discovered that there are three main themes that are lifted up in this monologue. Chapter 27 gave us the main theme that Job contrasts his integrity with the wisdom of the wicked. He contrasts his integrity with the wisdom of the wicked. Chapter 28 that we looked at on last week, he praises the priceless quality of wisdom. He lifts up and he admires the priceless quality of wisdom. He talked about how wisdom cannot be found anywhere, nor can it be brought. It's got to be given. Wisdom cannot be found and it cannot be bought. It's got to be given. And we're not sure in parts of chapter 28, as I stated on last week, if those words came from Job or if they were words from someone else. Some scholars think that they were the words of an individual that we'll see in the chapters later called Elihu. We're not really for sure. However, we know that in the backdrop of chapter 28, wisdom is on display. And wisdom is a priceless jewel if you have it. It's more expensive than gold, silver, or any kind of metal, precious metal, or any kind of jewel. Wisdom is in a category all by itself. And we're thankful to God that God has given us wisdom. We're thankful that God has blessed others with wisdom, but we know that that wisdom, they did not get that by searching for it. They did not get it because they bought it. They got it because God gave it to them. They got it because God gave it to them. Now that we're in chapters 29 through 31, we'll discover that Job will spend time on dwelling upon himself. He'll start to talk about himself. Now, when we look at chapters 29, 30, and 31, and tonight we're just covering chapter 29 before we go on our rest and refuel break, I want you to make mention or note that these chapters 29 through 31, will resemble the closing argument of a skilled lawyer. These chapters will resemble, if you've ever watched any kind of court case like Law and Order and other court cases, or even if you've been in court yourself, you've seen how the lawyer will come up and he'll close out, or she will close out their case. They will sum up all of the evidence. they'll present the facts, and they will reinforce the legitimacy of the plea. And that is what Job is going to be doing in these chapters, in chapters 29, 30, and 31. He's going to resemble or mimic a skilled lawyer, summing up the evidence, presenting the facts, and reinforcing the legitimacy of the plea. That's what we're going to discover. Now let's take a look at chapter 29. So let me go back over it real quick. Chapter 27, these are the three main points in the monologue. Chapter 27, he contrasts his integrity with the wisdom of the wicked. Chapter 28, he praises the priceless quality of wisdom. And in chapters 29 through 31, he will spend time dwelling upon himself, where we'll discover that he will resemble a skilled lawyer, summing up the evidence, presenting the facts, and reinforcing the legitimacy of his plea. Now, when we look at chapter 29, in some of the subscriptions, if you have a particular Bible, I know in the New King James Version, it has a subscription, a subtitle up there, and it says Job's Summary Defense. And he's giving his summary. I told you he's going to be presenting some cases. He's going to be presenting his case and lifting up his evidence and presenting facts. And when you look at verses 1 through 17 of chapter 29, Job begins his final speech looking back on the things that gave his life meaning and value before the disaster shook him at his core. He's going to reflect, retrospectively looking back on the things, the people that gave his life meaning or significance and value before God allowed the calamity to fall on his life. He's going to be looking back. He's going to be going back into the backdrop of life and seeing the things that gave his life meaning. These verses will also detail the character of Job. Job 29 says, Job further continued his discourse and said in verse 2, "Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness." Verse 4 from the New Revised Standard Version, "When I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was still with me, and when my children were around me, when my steps were washed with milk and the rock poured out from me streams of oil, when I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square." Look at how he's painting this picture. He's going back into his, as the New Revised Standard Version says, into his prime days, when life was blissful for him. Look at verses 2 through 6, because in verses 2 through 6, Job paints an image of God's protective presence. He paints the image of God's protective presence, by which he describes it as being like one who has a personal relationship with God. He paints an image of God's protective presence, by which he describes it as being like that of a personal relationship. Look at what he says. Look at what he says. "Oh, that I were in the months of old." I'm going back. "As in the days when God watched over me." That's God's protective presence. "When his lamp shone over my head, and by his light I walked through darkness." When I was in my prime, here's how he describes this personal relationship. "When the friendship of God was upon my tent." At this stage in Job's life, if you remember anything about the chapters previous from this chapter, Job is seen as an enemy of God. He feels like he and God are adversaries. But now he's reminiscing, he's going back, and he says, I remember when God and I had a friendship. It was an unbreakable bond. When the friendship of God was upon my tent. He no longer feels that way. But he said, I remember when things were good. He also presents in in verses 2 through 6, he also presents the image of his household and their well-being, expressed in the terms of prosperity and abundance. He deals with this whole notion of progeny. He deals with that, and what he's talking about, he says, I remember when my household was looked upon as being something blessed. Watch this. When the Almighty was still with me, verse 5, when my children were around me, when my steps were washed with milk and the rock poured out from me streams of oil. He's literally picturing, or he's allowing us to see domestic blissfulness. Like everything around him is just perfect. Like he has no want for anything. Like life is just, it is just perfect. When he talks about in verse 6 about his steps being bathed or milked, like milk, what he's dealing with, that is painting the picture of superabundance. That's superabundance. It's a superabundance of wealth. Job said, that's how my life was before all of this crap happened. I had it made. I didn't have to worry about anything. God's presence was with me. God protected me. I walked in God's light even in darkness. He was a friend of mine. My children were around me. But in reality now, none of that seems to take place in Job's life. Children are gone. He no longer walks in abundance. He walks in need. Life as he once knew it is no longer. Look at verse 7 through 10, because there he goes on to describe his relationship and interaction with society, with his peers, and with others. When I went out, verse 7 says, to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose up and stood. The nobles refrained from talking and laid their hands on their mouth. The voices of princes were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. He highlights how, firstly, he has respect among leaders of the people. He highlights how he has respect among the leaders of the people. When he walks through the door, watch what he says. Young men withdrew. Aged people rose up and stood. The voice of princes are hushed. The nobles, people who are in high places, they refrain from talking. He says, when I walked in the gate of the city, that term gate is the place where legal and community matters were settled. The gate, when I asked this question, what is the gate? The gate was not necessarily the entrance of the city, but it was the place where legal and community matters were settled. The gate was a place where legal and community matters were settled. This is here so that this verse can give the picture of Job as a leader among leaders who is respected by all groups and all ages. When I walked through the gate of the city, young men withdrew. The old people stood up. They rose up when I walked in. Now, you may think that Job right now is bragging. It appears like that. He's tooting his own horn. That's what it seems like. But what we got to remember, this is not where Job is right now. He's going back down memory lane. He's going back down memory lane. Y'all remember that? And he is looking at how things were before trouble and chaos and disaster hit his house. So instead, I don't really think that Job is bragging. I think he's testifying in a sense of how things were, because where he sits now, he only wishes that those things were. He only wished that life as it used to be was life as it is now. He's going back, and while he's talking about this in verse 7 through 10 about his relationship and interaction with people, I think this goes back to proving how the book of Job opens and how true it was. If you remember Job chapter 1, verse 3, the text tells us that Job was the greatest man among all of the people in the East. And these verses prove that. Job is a leader himself among leaders. He has so much respect. Watch this. And I'm going to tell you why he has respect. And it's going to come from verses 11 through 17. And it has nothing to do with his riches. It has nothing to do with his background. It has everything to do with his character. That's why he's noted to be the greatest man among those in the East. It is because of his character. Character will take you a long way. A good character, a good reputation will get you into places that money can't. It will allow people to respect you, not necessarily for what you have, but who you are. Let me say that one more time. Character will allow people to respect you not for what you have, or not necessarily for what you can do, but rather who you are. And even more so, how you make them feel. Why you say that, Pastor? Look at verses 11 through 17. Because there in verses 11 through 17, Job talks about his paternal care, P-A-T-E-R-N-A-L, his paternal care and interaction, rather his paternal care for the marginalized members of society. He deals with his fatherly care, his paternal care for the marginalized members of society. This is what gives Job his position as being, as chapter 1 verse 3 says, the greatest man among all of the people in the East. Look at verse 11 through 17. When the ear heard it, it commended me, and when the eye saw it, it approved, because I delivered the people who cried and the orphan who had no helper. Verse 13, the blessing of the wretched came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was, here it is, a father to the needy. And I championed the cause of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made them drop their prey from their teeth. Job talks about his paternal care for the marginalized members of society. And what he does, he embodied the value, watch this, of the community. He embodied the value of the community and did not turn his head away from the burdens that people had to bear. Job not only sympathized, he empathized with the people. He sat where they sat, he walked where they walked, and he lended a helping hand to those who were in need. Let me tell you the reality. If Job was present today, I can bet you that Job would voice his opinion and declare the wrongful heresy of the U.S. Supreme Court for overturning Roe versus Wade. I guarantee you he would speak out on that. I believe he would speak out on the systemic ills that rob people of their dignity and their humanity even today. Why? Because he was a father to the needy. He did not turn his head on those who were in need. He helped out. And because of that, the scripture tells us that because of that, because he provided protection and provision for those who couldn't, he was honored. That's what the text tells us, that he was honored. I want to look back at verse 11, because verse 11 shows us that it appears, watch this, that what Job said and what Job did were often judged by the ears and eyes of the community. Verse 11 tells us that what Job said and did were often judged by the ear and the eye of the community. Look at what he says. When the ear heard, then it blessed me. And when the eye saw, then it approved me. Once again, Job proves a fundamental truth. You don't ever know who's watching you. You never know. You never know who's watching. And they were judging Job based on what they heard and what they saw. And their calculations was this. It follows in the rest of the verse. He delivered the poor who cried. He was the helper to an orphan. And the blessing of the wretched came upon me and caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. These things prove the character of Job. That's why I go back to say that in verses 1 through 17, he begins his final speech looking back on the things that gave his life meaning and value, but they also detail his character. Character is who you are when nobody is looking. It's who you are when nobody is looking. We good? All right, let's look at verses 18 through 20. In verses 18 through 20, Job expresses one thing that he is confident of or confident in. He's confident, church, here it is, that he would reach a comfortable age and then die. He is confident that he would reach a comfortable and ripe old age and then die. Look at what he says. Then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. Now those verses may not make any sense to you. So let me read them. In the contemporary version, the New Revised Standard Version says these words. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days like the phoenix. My roots spread out to the waters with the dew all night on my branches. My glory was fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. Verse 18 deals with this phoenix. And you may not know what a phoenix is, but a phoenix Phoenix, not Phoenix, Arizona, but a phoenix is a mythical bird. It's in mythology. It's a mythical bird that lived for 500 years. It's a mythical bird that would live for 500 years or more. And the thought of it is that when it dies, over time, it is reborn from its ashes. And that is how Job is kind of painting this picture, that he's going to be like a phoenix. He's going to live, die, and then be reborn. He's going to live, die, and then rebirth is going to take place. Now, here's the reality. Job said, I thought that that's how my life was going to be. But the reality is, Job says it's not really like that right now. In fact, his confidence is only despair and uncertainty. He said, I thought, keywords, thought. I thought. But what Job doesn't realize is that this will happen to him eventually. He's going to have a rebirth. It's going to take some time. But when we get to the end of Job, things will start to look like the phoenix being reborn from its ashes. Things will be multiplied to Job. He'll have children again. His land, everything that happened beforehand will be doubled in the end. But that doesn't really look like how things are turning out right now for Job. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like things are turning out. That's why Job said, I thought. I thought that this is how things were going to be. I thought. But in reality, I think Job says, I've kind of lost all hope in that. Things are not turning out the way I had envisioned that they would. And don't get Job wrong. That is how some of us may feel at times. You thought life was going to turn out this way, but it's not unfolding in the way that you had envisioned that it would. But don't ever lose your hope. That's a word for somebody tonight. Don't you ever lose your hope. Let's look at the remaining verses, and I promise you I'm out of here. Verses 21 through 25 will show us how that these verses turn from the sustaining strength Job received to the way he sustained his community. He turns back to the respect in which he once held. Look at verses 21 through 23, because there Job's leadership is described. And it's described as if he takes on the role as a counselor. He is an honored speaker and leader. Let's read it. They listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my words dropped upon them like dew. They waited for me as for the rain. They opened their mouths as for the spring rain. Verse 24, I smiled on them when they had no confidence, and the light of my countenance they did not extinguish. Now, verse 24, this verse can be translated in more than one way, but the meaning is clear. And it means that the facial expressions that Job displayed were enough to sustain those who depended on him. The facial expressions, Job didn't even have to open up his mouth, but his facial expressions sustained those who depended on him. I smiled on them when they had no confidence, and the light of my countenance they did not extinguish. Verse 25, it ends this way. I choose their way and sat as chief, and I lived like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners. Now, verse 25, there is a cluster of images described here. I choose their way, I set as their chief, and I live like a king among his troops. Those are three things. That's the first three things that we have to deal with. I chose their way, I set as chief, I live like a king. Y'all see those three things? The three images he presents in verse 25. I chose their way, set as a chief, and I live like a king. The first three all have to do with leadership. All have to do with leadership in terms of royal authority and the ability to make decisions for the entire community. I picked the way that they were to go. I told them this is the way. I set as chief, meaning I oversaw them. And I lived like a king amongst his troops. That describes leadership in terms of royal authority and the ability to make decisions for an entire community. They looked upon Job as being their leader. Watch this, because of his wisdom. Because of his wisdom and ability to lead and make decisions for the community, he picked the way that they were to go. He sat as chief and he lived like a king amongst his troops. That's the first cluster of images that we see painted here. The last one here, he says, and I sat like a king amongst his troops, and like one who comforts mourners. Can I be honest with you? That little image right there is so shady. Tell somebody tonight, that's shade at its best. That is shade at its best. How do you say that? Right here, he places this here because this was the task. Remember, nobody's around Job other than them three friends. And he places that right here because this was the task the friends undertook and failed to perform. They came to be comfort to the mourner. But in fact, Job, remember, he calls them miserable comforters. The reason being is because they thought that their comfort was to give him advice on how things should turn out. But they missed, watch this, write this down. Comfort is not a matter of offering responses, but comfort is providing a sense of supportive community during overwhelming times. Comfort is not you offering your opinion. Comfort is providing a sense of support during overwhelming times. And watch this. And sometimes support is silence. You ain't always got to speak. You ain't always got to offer your advice. Sometimes it's your presence and you being quiet that gives a person comfort. And Job says, and that's what I was. I was the one who sat like the one who comforts mourners. I may not have said a mumbling word, but my presence made the difference. So to reflect on things, on how things rather used to be and how he was once viewed and respected, would extend Job's claim as he wonders why chaos and calamity has fallen on him. I was a good man, Job would say. And I wonder why has all of this happened to me. Y'all, I got to go. It's a bittersweet moment. This is my last Tuesday tune-up until the fall. I pray that y'all pick up that summer reading guide and continue reading through Job. We'll be back in the fall. Y'all get you some rest. It's rest and refuel month. This is the last one. I'm going to miss you. I'm going to love you. But I got to go. I got to go. All right, y'all be easy. Don't forget about some of the things that are taking place in the life of our church. This Sunday, first Sunday, I know it's the 4th of July weekend, but we have Holy Communion. We're going to celebrate communion on this holiday that people are celebrating. My holiday was Juneteenth. I'm going to let y'all celebrate the 4th of July if you want to. Holiday for me was Juneteenth, so that's my Independence Day. But all of the things that are taking place in the life of our church, even while we're on our rest and refuel break, we've got some fellowship activities taking place. Our men's ministry are scheduled to go to the baseball stadium, the High Point Rockers, on the 22nd of July. So you'll hear that in the announcements next week. All right. I love y'all. I'm praying for you. Don't forget to keep praying for our country and one another. Until we meet in the fall, I love you with all of my heart. May God's blessings be upon you. Peace.